I want to come back to a comment you said a few minutes ago when you said about outsiders.
You should run with that. Non-watery people. I like it a lot.
Hello and welcome to the stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarni, a water strategy consultant doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And today we're pleased and thrilled to be joined by Madeleine Bell, who's in charge of strategy. Put my teeth back in charge of strategy and special projects for Desolenator. What a start that was. Anyway, Madeleine, how are you?
Nice to meet you, and thanks for having me. End of season 2. That's I assume it's been a roller coaster. Tell me, what has surprised you both since both being on podcasts?
I think the dress sense. I think the shirts. Let's come back to that. Start.
I love how you quickly turn the tables, Madeleine. That's great.
Yeah, well, you must have interviewed a whole range of good guests, and also it's hard putting together a podcast. So I'd love to know how you found it.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. I don't know. I think there's been so many amazing guests. Throughout season 1, we did 17 episodes, and then here 10 episodes for season 2. I think every guest brings something different, but for me, one of the highlights was the World Water Day video we produced. I don't know if you saw that, where we reached out to a lot of friends and we said, okay, within 10 seconds, tell us what we can do to get people to value water. And we kind of cut that together really quickly. And for me, that was a phenomenal spread of the different guests from Eleanor Allen from the charity Water for People, through to Mike Zelkine, the boss of the vertical farming company, through to, we had Yang Villa write us a song about valuing water. He kind of went all Disney, which was amazing. And even at the end, Fiona Regan from DCU in Ireland just said, get people to love water, and we're kind of halfway there. So for me, we had such amazing feedback on that World Water Day video. People said it was like an emotional roller coaster. 1 minute they were in hysterics, next minute they were crying. So I think that was a really powerful summary of perhaps some of the guests from season 1 and 2, but really a powerful bit of storytelling as well. Hey, what about you?
Yeah, I believe we suspected this when we launched, in terms of what we wanted to get out of it and what our style and brand would be, and it's been reinforced with everyone that we've had, which is, water is such a personal human story. What draws people to dedicate either their entire life or part of their time in solving water and engaging others on the topic. So it'll sound corny, but I've been really moved by the people we've had on and the stories they tell about why this is important, why they're committed to it. Our colleague Dre, years ago, when I explained what I did, she said, "Oh, you live in the solution." Well, yeah, we should be all damn proud that we live in the solution and, tell our personal stories. So, for me, that was sort of the ongoing lessons learned. Like, why did you do this? And
it was
moving.
The origin story, right? And we always found people had this connection, whether from childhood. Iona Debrescu from Water Footprint Implementation, talking about her grandparents' village and kind of looking for contaminated water sources. Do you remember, as part of the studies? Right? Yeah. Yang Villa and his parents in the Philippines, actually, when he takes friends back, there's still a lack of access to water. And this is something that kind of sparked that journey and that connection to water is really, I think, quite powerful. But then these amazing guests went on to have a career in the field.
And also the rower, Sarah Moon.
Yes.
It's
a great episode.
Yeah, it just connected a whole other group of people to this conversation around, what's wrong and what we need to do. So.
The non-usual suspects is what we.
And Madeleine, did that answer your question? Were we responsive?
Yeah, I think
Madeleine, you've got to be careful because we're just going to talk for half an hour now. You need to throw back to you.
Well, I was going to jump in and say that I have the same kind of childhood or at least teenagehood catalyst for joining the water industry of being about 14 and going to work experience with my aunt who worked in distributing medicines for waterborne diseases. So a lot of neglected tropical diseases such as schistosomiasis. And that summer really had a profound impact on me. And I made a commitment going back to school, age about 15, that I wanted to work in water or at least something that had impact. And this is what I've ended up doing. But I think what has always surprised me over the last few years is that I thought I would work in a water NGO or a not-for-profit. And actually, there's this amazing space of social entrepreneurship in water. And by that, I mean for-profit companies where environment or social cause is right at the heart of what they do. And I think there's something really powerful about a business trying to be financially sustainable and also having a mission. And I think that's something I really try and share now as I go into schools and talk about social entrepreneurship as a mission, because I think a lot of people are really keen to have impact. And this is a space that I wish I'd known about when I was at school, because it's also a bit of an adventure when you join a startup and where you can work on something you really are passionate about, but you also have the thrill of learning how to grow a business.
So how do you find the kind of the reactions from the kids when you're going into school talking about water from an entrepreneurial point of view? Because I know, Will, you do some various talks, and so I'm always interested to see how we can motivate kind of future generations to come into water. And I think sometimes we don't come at it from the right angle, which is not just the entrepreneurial angle, but the digital angle, the kind of what I call the very cool side of water, like the kind of the innovation side of using data and kind of earth observation science from space. There's these incredible things that I didn't realize were part of water until you kind of get in and look under the bonnet. So I think if we can explicitly make them part of the narrative to future generations, we could attract a lot more people into the industry.
Yeah, I'm always struck by the intelligence and the kind of the really observant questions that I get when I go into schools. And it can be someone who is 8 years old and will come with something really important, which sometimes it's really hard to answer, which is why don't governments or corporates value water as much as they should? Whereas you're telling me as an 8-year-old that I should turn the tap off when I brush my teeth to save water and do really small actions. But why are we not enabling or not demanding that companies will stick to very strict limits? And sometimes that's really hard to answer. But I think it's so important to speak to people when they are in school, because they're more likely to then go home and change actions. And then you catalyze actions in the household and older generations as well.
I agree with that. I last year, and I'm going to do it again this year, speak to my sister's 4th grade class in New York. And actually it's all the 4th grade classes. And those were the best questions. I mean, without a doubt. And, you know, I present to university classes also, you know, on the topic of water, but I found the questions from the 4th graders to be mind-blowing. Just, you know, like really sort of a reset on explaining simply, you know, why water matters. So, I mean, really transformative. I loved it.
Yeah, I think about this question a lot. Why is water so undervalued? And I think it comes down to 2 key areas. Obviously, it's quite a nuanced question, but I think it comes down to just a lack of understanding just how finite the freshwater reserves are on Earth compared to the total volume which is available, and how this finite supply is being affected by climate change. And I think if there was more transparency about that, then I think that could be really powerful. I mean, on our blue planet, 98% of this water is seawater, and then of the fresh water available, around 80% of that is trapped in glaciers and icebergs. And so we're already living as a very demanding human society on 0.01% of the water sources available. And I think just that statistic alone should be cause for concern, let alone if you start to think about how climate change is affecting rainfall and making rainfall more erratic, so it reduces our supplies, or you have storm surges and rising sea levels contaminating freshwater sources from below. So we're on track for this perfect storm of rising demand and diminishing supply. And I think that is where we've got to start as to how we start getting people to really value the water that we have.
I think the perfect storm has already hit a few places, right? I mean, I'm not a fan of the day zero narrative that was used in Cape Town. I think once you reach day zero, it's acceptance of a kind of governance failure. But look at Taiwan. I mean, there's a lot of headlines at the moment about water shortages in Taiwan, and not many people know that Taiwan is a global powerhouse of computer chip manufacturing. Semiconductors, right? Which is a very thirsty industry. So no water, no semiconductors, suddenly phones, tablets, it could cause a huge halt in the supply chain. So I think once you reach that stage in the narrative, it's too late.
Hey, sort of picking on the day zero thing, that, I see that as problematic. I agree with you, Tom, that, if we keep talking about day zero, it almost ignores the fact that it could have been avoided.
Right.
It's like, well, day zero is going to show up. Well, no, if there was public policies that addressed it, proactively, then you wouldn't have day zero. I mean, you can grow crops in the desert. You can manufacture semiconductors in an arid environment.
Mm. I think what day zero in Cape Town actually showed was that water, unlike, say, maybe carbon emissions, which is sometimes much harder to localize, water is actually an incredibly local resource, and the actions across the whole of the Cape Town population were able to avert, or at least delay for weeks, an impending day zero. And I think actually we should take a lot of comfort from the fact that people, if you make individual actions, you can actually have a positive impact on the location that you are in. And so if people say, oh, well, my, turning off the tap is only a drop in the ocean, actually, I think Cape Town was a good example of all those drops adding up to make cumulative and tangible action.
Madeleine, let me ask you this. We're going to take a track here. I mean, for me, day zero in Cape Town also illustrated the inequity in access to water. So for those that could afford it, they got water. For those that could not, they suffered. I mean, they, waited on lines, they paid a higher price. So, the notion that everyone suffers equally is really not the case, not just in Cape Town, but globally. So, for those that can, they get it. And for those that can't, they suffer. So, this whole idea that there's this gap between supply and demand and it's going to, impact everyone equally is really not the case.
I think you've touched on a really interesting point, which, as someone who is an outsider to the water industry, and actually my whole team as outsiders in the water industry, we look at the traditional water supply chain and we see that this perpetuates cycles of inequality, unsustainability. It increases costs and risks. And I mean, just to go into what I mean by that, the model today is for vast, centralized, grid-dependent water purification with very long supply chains to the end user. And this could be supply chains via infrastructure, but that creates its own challenges such as leaking and contamination, as you can see in London, as you've seen in Flint, Michigan. Or you have supply chains which are transporting water via tankers. Saudi Arabia today has the largest fleet of water trucks in the world. Or you have Greek islands transporting water via boat. And that's not to mention plastic bottles. And I think this whole supply chain is what really increases the inequality, because it creates additional costs and it creates additional risks. And actually what we're trying to do at Desolenator is reimagine the water supply chain and move to a future of decentralized and much more locally provided water to try and offset some of these challenges.
So let's dig into that, because I know we've talked a bit about decentralized before, I know with Jacob Amengor, but in terms of what do you actually mean by decentralized? So this is a self-sustaining, this is including solar energy as well, right? So it's water purification using solar that's completely off grid, or is there mains power involved as well?
So we are 100% solar powered, and this is not just a new or retrofitting solar panels to an existing technology, but this is a whole new approach. So what we do is we harness 4 times the standard solar energy, because we're harnessing thermal or waste heat energy as well as electrical energy. So our solar panels operate at about 60% efficiency, and these power essentially a giant kettle. It's a distillation process. And so you can put in any water source, from seawater to brackish to contaminated. And this is evaporated and condensed and creates pure H2O, which we then remineralize for taste. And we are also storing the energy that we capture during the day. We store that in thermal batteries. So actually, although we're 100% solar powered, we can operate through the night.
Madeleine, I've got a question. You know, as I listen to your description and, you know what I know as an outsider about Desolenator, I would put you in the category of off-grid.
Exactly.
So, you know, you have the ability to generate water, store energy without being hooked up to anything. And when I think about localized, it's, you know, more like what Organica does with respect to, you know, localized treatment systems that are, you know, part of the grid, but you know, a smaller subset of it. So I think what you've done is in the disruptive category.
Well, let me give you an example. So we're speaking to a number of different islands in the Caribbean, and today the problem of water is actually an energy problem. So energy is very expensive. You have challenges of power cuts, and you have challenges that when you have a natural disaster and the electricity goes offline, you also cut your water supply. And so by being off grid, you are building resilience against both rising energy prices, which can increase your water prices. And that comes back to the equality and the equity point that you made, Will. But it's also about how do you build resilience against the impacts of climate change. So we can do that in a dual way, because we can purify many different types of water, whether you have rising sea levels because of climate change, but also it's about how do you have a resilient energy sector. And that's what we mean about breaking the supply chain.
And Madeleine, what about the price of water? I should have checked, but how does that compare to, not that I think it's a fair comparison, because Tom and I have had this discussion about air moisture capture technology companies, and it's not so much an issue of price, it's an issue of access and democratizing that access. But do you bump into an issue of, the price point might be a little bit higher, or maybe it's not, compared to, big centralized systems?
So actually, when you look at levelized cost of water, which is the capital expenditure of a system plus the lifetime of operating costs, a lot of water technologies today have a much higher energy cost, because they require a lot of energy to purify the water. And so we are eliminating the energy demands for the 25-year life cycle of this plant. And we also eliminate a lot of the small tricky elements such as membranes, and we don't use chemicals. And chemicals can be a really significant challenge and cost ongoing. So actually we have a very low levelized cost of water when you take into account the fact we have very low operating costs. And just to give you an example, so we're working in the Sundarbans in West Bengal, which is a part of India that it's very low lying, and so they have problems with storm surges, and they've had a lot of rising sea levels over the last few years. And we are able to purify water locally. It's a plant that is going live this year, and we have worked with the community to be able to sell water at an affordable cost, so that we can ensure better equity and access to water.
I think the good thing about this, I looked into it before the interview. This is the Carlsberg partnership, right? It's Together Towards Zero, but it's a fact that where you're providing water and power is kind of 120 kilometers away from the brewery. So it's in an area that was deemed high risk by a WWF's water risk filter. But actually it's not kind of within the vicinity of the treatment plant, right? But it's still, and Will, you talk about this, it's kind of providing water and innovating and stimulating the supply chain beyond the own footprint of the brewery.
Right.
So that's what I think this the kind of the great part of that partnership with Carlsberg in West Bengal is about as well.
Yeah.
Well, no, go ahead.
Just to give a little bit of context to that problem, to that project, Tom. So water is the core ingredient in beer. And so beverage companies around the world have very ambitious water stewardship goals. And what I mean by water stewardship is how can you look at your operations and the entire water supply chain and see where you can reuse water and where you reduce your water. But Carlsberg has gone a step further, and they really care about the communities who make up both local areas to the breweries, but also they've worked with the WWF to map where water stress is across whole swathes of India. And we have worked with them to identify a community where we can provide clean water, where water is changing and becoming completely undrinkable, to the point that salinity has become such a problem that people are migrating away from the area, because if you don't have water, nothing else in the town will survive. But this really, I think, is testament to Carlsberg's philosophy of going just beyond working with innovation, but actually to really care about the locations that they're working in.
Fantastic. No, it's a great collaboration and partnership. I want to come back to a comment you said a few minutes ago when you said about outsiders, and that's what Desolenator is about. It's kind of you've brought non-watery people.
Wait, Tom, did you say non-watery people?
Can we edit that out, please?
No. I think you should run with that. Non-watery people. I like it a lot.
But that's something I when I've spoken to kind of CEOs of startups that have gone on to do quite well. I won't kind of name and plug here, but I remember one of the CEOs, it was a digital company. He said to me, Tom, I'm purposely looking for fresh thinking IT digital guys who are new to water, because they just bring a completely different perspective on existing challenges. I think that's a really interesting point that you mentioned that we should run with. Will, you always say, bring in the outsiders, right? It's one of your mantras. I think there's a lot of kind of power behind that.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I agree with myself. Yes, more outsiders, have the ability to look at, and Alex talked about this, Alex Prallo, in that, we need people that can look at the problems that we've faced in the water sector through a whole other lens and bring skills from other sectors and, really do something different. And, we're definitely seeing that in more and more of the accelerators, like, TNC Techstars partnership, ABN Bev 100+. Oh, and Madeleine, congratulations on being part of the Imagine H2O cohort.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that was announced this week, right? Yeah, congratulations.
It was announced yesterday. Great timing with Earth Day today.
Right.
We're very excited to be joining that and the team there. And I think there is immense power in being an outsider to the industry, because water especially, I think, is very antiquated in how it is produced in many parts of the world. In the UK alone, around 20% of our water is lost every year because we still use the Victorian infrastructure.
Right.
And so in a world where water supply is increasingly uncertain, how can we address those challenges? And so, I'm very excited to be working in a company that's really looking and saying, how do we create local resilience and try and overcome the long-term challenges that the water industry has faced? And I'll say, we're not the solution for everywhere. Water is such a mighty problem that you do need all different types of solutions in different geographies. But I think we have a real role to play in places where water stress and climate change are starting to meet.
So I'd love to hear kind of on your entrepreneurial journey then with Desolenator, and you've talked a bit about the partnership and the technology. I think something that we don't talk enough about in this industry as a whole, from entrepreneurs and others, is when things don't work out, right? We had an early meeting about James Watt from Brewdog, right? The captain or the CEO, and he's done some incredible LinkedIn posts recently. He's like my top 5. I'm not sure if we're allowed to swear on the stream yet. We're still figuring out the house rules.
Oh, no. I think we agreed. You should be the one that does it, though. I mean, we agreed we could do
shift it onto me, right?
Well, but I mean, with the accent, it just sounds so much better than if I said it, with the New York accent. So go for it, Tom.
James, what he says, my top 5 fuck ups, right? As a CEO, as a company, things he's invested or he's tried new, and phenomenally, it did so well in terms of people just saying, look, can you imagine the CEOs of other major brewing companies kind of admitting to that? Really refreshing. So I'd love to hear kind of maybe, have you got any parts of your journey as a company when you joined where you just didn't quite work out, or it wasn't as you expected? I think that's something that we love to celebrate success as every other industry, but we don't like to talk when things don't quite work out.
Yeah, that's a good question, and especially as an individual, I joined the company when I was 24 and had essentially just left university, and you really are learning on the job, and I think that is an amazing part of being in a startup, is being able to be agile and learn quickly. I mean, personally, I would say that we've taken on some very audacious projects, including, committing to a project in the Canary Islands and then saying, right, how do we get the technology down there in a small company? And it turned out the solution was that we drove for a week across Europe and took a ferry to try and make it happen. So I think sometimes you get to the
but isn't that the entrepreneurial spirit? You take something on and you find a way to get it done. Right?
Yeah, the absolute ownership is okay. Well, we've committed to the outcome, so let's work out the process of how we get there. So that's definitely been some journeys that I hadn't foreseen, and also in terms of trying to build partnerships, I think you learn which are some of the factors that will lead to good partnerships later down the line, and the ones that haven't worked out so well. So just to give a quick example about Carlsberg, I think why that has worked out is that they are very keen to work with innovations, and it's not always easy to combine an institution and an innovation. Small companies can get swallowed up very quickly, or big companies don't work agility. They don't work fast enough to keep up with startups. Whereas Carlsberg, it's worked because they have experience working in innovations, and I think we were able to align on a roadmap together, a 2030 mission of how do you design a better water future. And I think that is a great central pillar to come back to when you have unforeseen elements of building a project. We've chosen a very challenging location in the Sundarbans where you have to take into account hurricanes and monsoon seasons and tigers, which sometimes can appear at night. And so I think for us as a company, we do want to take on audacious projects and commit to the hardest places in the world, sometimes where other technologies are just rendered obsolete.
Right.
And where we can really have a transformative impact. And with that, of course, comes many challenges. But actually, if you can figure them out in the toughest locations, then I think that helps us enable to scale and have impact in other areas.
Any moves into the US at all?
Imagine H2O could be our...
Well, certainly that is a good point. I posted something on LinkedIn this morning about the Western US being in the grips of a mega drought. And if you look at the map, the Colorado River Basin is like right in the middle there. So when you work with the team, push that along.
That was one of my questions for you, Will, is given what is happening in Colorado in the local environment, what do you think is the opportunity for the fund that you have set up, and what are going to be the bottlenecks that you will have to overcome?
Yeah, that's really a great question. I love how this conversation is a two-way. It's interesting. I don't believe we will have a challenge on the technology pipeline. There are some really good companies out there that are doing things that are very innovative, strong team, strong business model, and they have clients. So, there is that pool out there. One of our goals is to engage investors that historically have not invested in the water sector or have an interest and are, going through the learning process, the bringing in the outsiders from the investor side of the equation. So, I don't know if it's a challenge necessarily, but it's going to be something that we continue to work on very hard. And we've been doing that over the past 3 weeks. So, but it does bring up an important point. So working with Imagine H2O, TNC Techstars, the 100+ Accelerator, which I believe their cohort opened up today. There are a lot of great startups that enter those programs and come out of those programs stronger, better funded, more clients. So, yeah. I mean, we'll see, Madeleine, but I'm feeling good about the pipeline because of those programs and the companies we're seeing. I just believe we're going to really work at bringing in outside investors that historically have not looked at water.
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity to get people excited about water. I think there's so many cool things that water can be used for if we can scale technologies that can create fresh water. And I just think water can be part of so many parts of our lives that we don't even think about often, and that's the way that we need to move forward after accelerators. And when you have technologies on the cusp of scale, is thinking, what do they do, not just as water on its own, but how does that underpin every industry and agriculture? I think 70% of the water worldwide is used for agriculture, and we're on track for a population growth of another 3 billion people. And so how do we engage investors and about these other challenges that are all underpinned by water?
Well, that's why we wanted, when we did the stream, to kind of come back to the beginning, is to choose the water, energy, food nexus, because we didn't want to just focus on water. I mean, the piece you wrote for the World Economic Forum, Madeleine, did quite well on LinkedIn. I remember looking at it, and you had the Sustainable Development Goals, and then you kind of repositioned them all funneling towards water, which I thought was great because it underpins every single SDG. So I think that's why we wanted to have people involved in vertical farming, have people involved in solutions for agriculture, not kind of just have that pure kind of usual suspects within water.
I mean, talking of the water energy nexus, my favorite fact is about how when rockets take off, such as a NASA space shuttle, water is used as a sound suppressant because the pure energy, the sound waves, would tear the rocket apart if they didn't have a way to muffle that sound. So when you see a rocket take off, and you see what looks like lots of smoke at the bottom in a kind of the 30 seconds beforehand, that's actually water being shot out at 1 million liters per minute to ensure that the rocket can take off safely. So I think that's the best water energy fact.
That is a cracker, and that's one that's definitely going to get a lot of interest. I mean, I think the whole, obviously with the efforts going on Mars, is kind of what happened to water on Mars, and is that a look at our future in perhaps, hundreds of thousands of years' time? It's all kind of frozen and disappeared, but
totally.
Mega drought on Mars, right?
Right.
Or farming that comes forward. I mean, there's so many great facts about water being connected to our solar system, not least that they think about 10% of water came to Earth from comets, or that the same water that we drink today was used by the dinosaurs because the natural water cycle has simply been repeating itself for 5 billion years. And that's also why it's so important that we value water and we look at the water supply chain, because this is the water that all of our next generations for another 5 billion years hopefully will be using. But more at risk today than it's ever been.
I know people always talk about water recycling and water reuse as if it's new, but all water is essentially reused, right? And recycled. We've been doing it since the start of kind of civilization. So
yeah, you're always downstream from somebody.
Right.
I mean, that's the reality of it. Water's treated and discharged. So, why is water reuse in places like the US sort of a nascent, movement? I think it's going to accelerate, but it's nowhere near.
I think it needs to, doesn't it? But
oh yeah.
Well, great. Listen, guys, we're kind of over the 30-minute mark already. It's flown by completely. So yeah, Madeleine, thank you for joining us and kind of ending season 2 on a high. And it was a good excuse to kind of bring out the Hawaiians. The sun is shining. Will, I mean, we've dusted them off, right? It's ready to kickstart
literally,
season
Tom.
3
We've dusted them off
in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think in this year of COP26, the big meet in November, and the UN Ocean Decade kicking off, I really hope that this will galvanize corporates and governments to really start to value water and to understand that this is something that's changing whether people like it or not. And actually, the biggest risk is not taking action. It's not mapping water supply chains, understanding how to reduce water use and trying to include innovations, because I think water, it is fundamental to everything we do, and we have to stay optimistic, but we have to stay innovating.
What a nice way to end the podcast. A nice bit of optimism. And I think as well, it's true. Like, now is the time. I mean, Will, you always say you've been involved, the way you introduced it, I've been involved in water forever. I mean, for me, it was
pretty close, Tom.
from 2010. But I think now is the time where, there's more public attention, hopefully more investment, more kind of focus from governments on water infrastructure. We saw the announcement from the Biden administration very recently in terms of investment into US infrastructure. So now is the time. So Madeleine, thank you for joining us to close out season 2. Appreciate it, and best of luck with your continued entrepreneurial journey at Desolenator. And Will, closing thoughts from you, not just for the episode, but for the whole of season 2. No pressure.
Oh my!
We need like a Jerry's final thought, golden nugget to summarize everything we've done.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll do that. But let me get some slides to share with everyone. So I will say that I think we have redefined the nexus since we started. So it's certainly energy, water, and food, but it's also paddle boarding and rowing. And, it's a little bit of a joke, but it has sort of broadened the appeal of the discussion on water, bringing in people that maybe don't know the technical issues, Madeleine, that you've raised, but have a passion and an affinity for water. And, we need to get them hooked on some, solving some of the issues. So
water, energy, food, recreation nexus. Under recreation, surfing, paddleboard. Basically, we said it before. Anyone connected to water through an enjoyment of the sport or the lifestyle is more likely to kind of lead that citizen science and be engaged.
Right. I think we should add beer and spirits, Tom, also. I mean, it's going to get lengthy, but,
It's a long nexus. The more the merrier, right? Great stuff. All right. Well, again, Madeleine, thank you. Will, it's been
Madeleine
for season 2, and looking forward to kickstart in season 3 very shortly.
Great to see both of you.
Cheers, Madeleine. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.